I want to introduce to you Kim Potowski. I always have trouble with your last name.
I do too.
She's an associate professor of Spanish linguistics at the University of Illinois at Chicago, where she directs the Spanish for Heritage Speakers program. Her research focuses on Spanish in the U.S., including changes in Spanish structures and proficiency across generations, connections between the Spanish language and Latino identity, and heritage language education. She has authored, co-authored, and edited a total of 7 books, including Heritage Language Teaching, Research and Practice, Language Diversity in the U.S., El Español de los Estados Unidos, and Language and Identity in a Dual Immersion School. She has also authored 2 Spanish textbooks, one for beginners and a composition book for heritage speakers and advanced language learners. One of them, Conversaciones Escritas, is the one that we're currently using in the Spanish and Portuguese department. She is executive editor of the journal Spanish in Context and co-director of the Language and Context Research Group at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And so we welcome Kim Potowski.
For inviting me. So my official thanks. Can you all hear me? Among my many flaws, I've never been accused of having a low talker voice, so hopefully this will work. So thanks to Elena for inviting me, and to Dr. Federica Aldama from LASED for bringing me in as well. Thanks to all of you for being here. Thanks especially to Elena for the Buckeyes. She gave me some of the little candy Buckeyes. I'm going to have to eat them at the airport because if I take them home, my kids will eat them all. And apparently I'm now driving into the Graders versus Jenny's debate. And at the end of this talk, that's where we're going, so I can make up my mind about this very important topic. But in the meanwhile, today I've got to talk to you about this topic. We're going to be looking at heritage speakers. And I've divided into 2 major areas. So who are they? We're going to look at linguistically, academically, and effectively. Who are we talking about here? And then what are some good approaches to teaching Spanish to heritage speakers? If you aren't already convinced, I hope to show you that they have very different needs from our typical second or foreign language learners of Spanish. And as Elena pointed out, you do have a heritage speaker course here on this campus. It's at the higher level. We're thinking about ways to get one at a lower level and some placement procedures. There's a number of great people in place, and I'm so excited to be here to help you think about some of these issues with your heritage speakers. So the canonical definition, we typically turn to Guadalupe Valdez. She talks about native or / heritage. Some people use native, heritage, bilingual. There's a lot of overlap between these terms. People understand them differently. The definition I work with is this is someone who was raised in the U.S. in a home where a non-English language is spoken, and they may speak that heritage language, that non-English language, or they may only understand it. Okay? This is what's been referred to as the narrow definition. Why do we call it narrow? Because it does require some proficiency in the heritage language. Okay? There's also what we call the broad definition, and this would include folks whose families are of a particular ethno-linguistic group, but those folks may not have anything of the language in their brain. So sort of cognitively, they look exactly like a second language learner, but they have that, does that make sense? It's more of a social and historical affiliation they have. My definition does require that the folks do have some of the grammar in their brains. They have some proficiency, even if it's only auditory. Okay? Now, you probably know a good deal of these demographics I'm going to show you. We know that the 2010 census showed the U.S. Hispanic or Latino population is 17%, but they predict it's going to be almost 1 in 4 people in this country by 2050. I think it's going to be sooner than 2050. I'm putting my money on 2040. I'm not a betting woman, but that's kind of where I think it's going to happen. They're 17% of the overall U.S. population, but we're almost at that 1 in 4 among Hispanic children, right? Among our school-age children, we know that 1 in 4 are Latino. And there are a lot of areas that have schools that are 50 to 100% Latino. So when you read this, for example, in Chicago, this doesn't mean Chicago public schools are 33% Latino. It means 33% of schools in Chicago are 50 to 100% Latino, okay? Majority Latino schools. This is also the case in New York City. In Miami, it's about half. And Los Angeles, ni se diga. It's like 3 out of 4 schools are majority Latino schools, okay? Now this map here usually surprises no one. When you ask people, where are Spanish speakers in the U.S., they'll say, oh, they're in the Southwest, Southern Florida, they're in New York, some people will say Chicago, okay? The map that does tend to surprise people is this one. This is the percent change in the Latino growth between 1990 and 2000. And you're seeing this in areas that typically did not have a lot of heritage speakers, okay? And then from 2000 to 2010, we also see the sort of non-traditional areas having huge Latino population growth. Here is the good state of Ohio, and we can see a percent change of 100% or more, right, in central Ohio. I looked up some Columbus data. This is the city, not the metropolitan area. But apparently the 2000 census, you had about 17,000 Latinos registered, and that doubled, more than doubled, right? So these students are coming, they're here, right? Those who are working in the K-12 context are already dealing with them. And if we prepare ourselves properly, then at post-secondary, we can be a good place for them to arrive and thrive, okay? So basically, there's a high probability for instructors that you're going to have heritage speakers in your classes. And here I'm addressing myself to the Spanish language departments who are training future foreign language teachers. Most of us have only been trained in how to teach Spanish as a foreign language. We did a survey of foreign language departments across the nation. How many of them are actually offering anything, whether it be a course, a module in a course, a chapter of a book, a reading, anything that deals with the heritage speaker issue. And there are very, very few that are doing this, in spite of the fact that when those folks go off into the world to become Spanish teachers, they're gonna probably end up somewhere with heritage speakers, okay? So why are these folks different? Has anybody here worked with heritage speakers? Okay, so some of you, you already know a lot of this, okay? In fact, you can teach a 16-week course on these 3 topics, and I'm gonna do it in like 3 slides, okay? How are they different from L2 second language or foreign language learners, okay? There are really important linguistic, affective, and academic ways that these 2 populations are different. So let's talk about some of the linguistic ways. You could summarize it by saying that their path, the way they get to Spanish, is different, okay? So you could take 2 people and you could give them a test of vocabulary or grammar, things like that, and you might say, oh, they're matched in proficiency. But one's an L2 learner, second language learner, one's a heritage speaker, and you'll see that underneath there's a lot of different things going on, that they're not truly matched, okay? So of these 2 groups, which of the 2 tends to learn grammatical terminology? When they learn the pretérito, they learn that this is called the pretérito. When they learn the subjuntivo, they learn esto se llama subjuntivo, así se forma y así se usa. Which of the 2 groups do you think that's true for? L2. It's true for the L2. This doesn't mean that heritage speakers never learn grammatical terminology, but they often don't. Right? You know, when I'm brushing my kids' teeth, I don't talk about past participles and stuff like that. It's just, that's something that you learn when you study a language, right, as an object of study, okay? So, which of the 2 groups, the Spanish that they learn, almost always is going to be a prestigious variety of Spanish, and it's going to be a monolingual variety of Spanish. And I'll come back to what I mean by that in a moment, but which of the 2 groups do you think that tends to be? That's also the L2. This doesn't mean that the heritage speakers never learn a prestigious or monolingual variety of Spanish. What it does mean is that the heritage speakers very often will learn a stigmatized variety of Spanish. That's what's spoken in their communities by their families. And by virtue of growing up bilingually, they often engage in code switching and other bilingual practices. Our second language learners typically don't do these things. Okay, so they're very different in that way. Okay, so which of the 2 groups, when they're learning Spanish, they're almost always going to be exposed to reading and writing in the Spanish? It's going to be L2 again. This doesn't mean heritage speakers are never exposed to literacy in Spanish, but I'm going to show you some data in a moment that indicates that they very frequently are not. And at UIC, we have one of the larger heritage speaker programs in the nation. It's about 250 students a semester, and they'll come up to me and say, this is the first time I've ever read or written anything in Spanish before. Now, we have the great advantage that not only is Spanish very orthographically transparent, we also use the same alphabet. So my colleagues who do heritage Arabic education, heritage Russian, heritage Chinese education, I always say, oh, how do you deal with that? That's right. They can communicate, but they can't write it in Spanish. If you can speak it, you'll have some errors, but you can pretty much write it. Okay. Which of the 2 groups? Have you heard of the critical period? People argue about this, when it begins, when it ends, if it really exists. The idea is that somewhere between the ages of 8 and 10, your ability to learn a language and converge on a native-like system begins to decrease, right? Has anybody ever tried to study a foreign language as an adult? And you kind of feel like, oh boy, I'm never really gonna sort of pass for a monolingual if that were your goal, right? When anytime before, like I say, 8 to 10, you got a much better chance of that happening. So which of these two groups begins their learning of Spanish, typically, after the critical period is kaput, gone? It's the L2s. By definition, the heritage speakers are beginning to learn Spanish in the home. When do we typically begin foreign language education in this country? Right? So we wait till the critical period is long, that ship is long sailed, and then we say, now it's time for you to study another language, right? Only about 30%, I think, of elementary schools across the country offer any kind of foreign language education, and it's typically, 30 minutes a week, and you do colors and numbers and days of the week. In first grade, and then in second grade, you do colors and numbers and days of the week. And then in third grade, you move on to the months, maybe, right? There's no real proficiency goal going on there. That's what foreign language education looks like, right, in our country. So, which of the two groups is typically very fluent orally? This is our heritage. Even if they don't have the literacy, they've got the oral skills. Who tends to have a larger vocabulary, particularly for everyday types of things? I should have mixed this up more, right? Who tends to have greater sociolinguistic accuracy? For example, a lot of folks, not all of them, but this group will understand the difference between tú and usted and when to use them, and other cultural norms. And then the native-like pronunciation, of course, is the heritage, right? Okay, now I promised you I would come back to this point. I said that, and this is in Spanish, sorry. Second language learners learn a prestigious and monolingual variety. So what do I mean by this? Typically, varieties are prestigious when they are spoken by the upper classes. Urban tends to have more prestige than rural, right? And when folks have higher levels of formal education. These three things tend to travel together, not always, okay? And then linguistically, you might say, so those are social factors. Linguistic factors of prestigious varieties include the fact that they don't show recent effective contact. And I say recent because there's no such thing as a pure, right? All language has had some form of contact, right, with other languages. But here I'm talking about the recency of the contact, right? I mean, because doesn't Spanish have huge influences from Arabic and things like that? Okay. Now, when you talk about stigmatized language varieties, it's the flip side of what I just showed you, okay? These are forms of speaking from lower socioeconomic status speakers, rural areas, folks with lower levels of formal education. Again, those three tend to travel together. Also, a particular way of speaking can be stigmatized if it shows very recent contact with another language. And I'll give you some examples here. So here on the left, you have what are considered the prestigious variants of a couple of different Spanish features. Here you have what are considered stigmatized. Raise your hand if you've ever heard, seen, maybe used any of these stigmatized. Yeah, okay, it's all the time. So the reason why these first few are typically considered stigmatized is because of that first set of reasons, right? The social reasons. And then saying something like solicitar un trabajo for aplicar, right? Saying aplicar for solicitar, or saying felonía instead of delito mayor, right? These kinds of uses tend to be stigmatized because they show evidence of recent contact with English. Does this make sense? In fact, there are at least 6 different reasons why a form of language can experience stigma, but I'm focusing on the language contact and the social factors right here. So what happens is our heritage speakers often show up with these kinds of uses in their Spanish, and our second language learners don't. Okay? So those are just some of the linguistic pieces. What about the affective piece? What am I talking about here? Well, heritage speakers have a family connection to the language, obviously. We talked about this. However, many of them have been ridiculed. Okay? And this happens not only from the sort of hegemonic English-speaking majority in the US, right? We don't like English, we don't want to hear it. Do you remember the Coke commercial during the Super Bowl like 2 years ago? They had people singing America the Beautiful in, I think, 10 different languages. Did you see what exploded on the internet after that? Now you might say, oh, these are a bunch of crazy right-wing whatevers. No, this is a lot of mainstream people who are offended by the idea of a multilingual nation. So these young people are growing up in a context that very strongly tells them your language is not welcome here and it's not valued. On top of that, their own families often criticize them for the ways that they speak Spanish. Hablas como pocho. You mix it with English. Your Spanish isn't strong enough. So they're getting this double thing, whammy that happens to them. Okay? They're very aware of their limitations in Spanish, particularly those who get to us at the university. They've done something right. Okay? And it's typically via their English that they've gotten here. They're all too aware that their Spanish isn't where they would like it to be very frequently. I mean, they'll come to my office, sort of, their tails between their legs. Ay, mi español es malo. Mi español es malo. I feel like saying, have you ever been to Spanish 3? Do you want to go in there and see how good your Spanish is? To help them see that. We've talked about the subordinate status of their home language and culture. So basically, there's a linguistic self-esteem issue that happens. And this cannot be ignored, right? We're not here to, sort of be Dr. Phil, and this is not touchy-feely stuff. This is real. This is, if you can't meet the student where they are and get them to move forward, I argue that you're not really helping them. It's going to be difficult to help them move forward with their Spanish. And then comes some of the academic things. We know that overall, this is generalization, but overall Latinos, families tend to have lower levels of formal education. My colleagues in education probably know more about this than I do, but I came across a study that only 39% of Latino children are being read to in any language, okay? Whereas it's much higher among the Anglo community, and it's been shown that when you read to a child, they tend to develop much higher, it's correlated with higher levels of literacy when they are older, okay? So Latino children are not being read to as frequently. Now this is due to a number of reasons. This is parents who themselves have low levels of literacy perhaps, who work 16 hours a day, they don't have access to books, etc., okay? We also know that poverty has devastating effects on learning. It's very difficult for children to learn well when they're hungry, or a tooth hurts, they're homeless, domestic violence, etc. So all of these issues, I argue, are very much present when we're working with heritage speakers, okay? High school dropout rates, of course, are abysmal. I was very sad to see that Ohio, you're doing just as badly as we are in Illinois with our Latino population. It kind of makes you understand why some people don't use the word dropout, they use the word push out. They argue that youth of color are being pushed out of school. Some scholars suggest, here's a little ray of hope, Spanish for heritage speakers courses may be able to contribute to both recruitment and retention in post-secondary context. So in other words, if it's done right, it gives these kids a space where they are empowered, they are positioned as knowledgeable, and that can help them not only graduate high school, but also get into college. And I know that both Elenas here are doing great work with outreach here in the Columbus community to get young Latinos to come here to OSU and be on campus. So not only are heritage speakers substantially different from second language learners, we've just covered that, guess what? They're also very different from each other. So if you say that heritage speakers are apples and our second language learners are oranges, right? All these students are fruity, right? But if you separate the apples from the oranges, you discover, wow, heritage speakers are not a homogeneous group, okay? You have some born in the US, some born abroad and come, but they come at different ages. So I'm going to present here to you 5 different composite profiles of who these heritage speakers are, okay? So you have someone like Marta, who's born in Mexico. She comes to the US at 7. Her family is from a small ranchito. She has some non-prestige features of Spanish, like the ones we just saw. Asistió a la escuela de manera intermitente. She spent 3 years in a bilingual ed program. She speaks only Spanish at home with her parents. She speaks 50-50 with her siblings. Of course, her younger siblings are going to use less and less Spanish because they can talk to Marta in English. Okay? So I see a lot of Marta on my campus. I don't see as many Luises. Luis was born in the US, but spent some of his childhood in Santurce. We know that los puertorriqueños tienen como un vaivén. There's a cyclical migration that frequently happens, which they're just starting to explore in Puerto Rico, how to help folks who are coming back deal with schooling, all in Spanish. He did not attend any bilingual eds. He speaks half Spanish, half English with his parents, and all English with his siblings. Okay? So who do you think is going to have a stronger Spanish system? Will it be Luis or Marta? It'll be Marta, but yet they're both heritage speakers. They're both apples. You may have them both in your heritage speaker classroom. Okay? Then you have Roberto. Llegó de Argentina, 12 años. You know, regular schooling, middle-class family. The variety of Spanish spoken by his family is considered a prestigious variety, etc. Now, the fact that he came at 12, you might say, well, where's the cutoff? Like, where do you become a native speaker, right? A linguistically mature native speaker who's not at risk of losing their Spanish, right? Versus a heritage speaker. I think if Roberto had come at 9, he would more clearly, to me, be a heritage speaker. When they come at 12, they look to me more like linguistically mature. I mean, if you ever talk to a 12-year-old, they're not adults, but they certainly, linguistically, are very, very set. But according to this definition, he is also a heritage speaker. What do you do if you have Roberto and Luis in the same class? Right, you have a challenge. Carolina, I'm starting to see more Carolinas, and I think in the next 10 years, I'm going to have a critical mass of Carolinas. She's what sociolinguistically we call third generation. She was born in the US and so were her parents. Okay? Her grandparents are from Honduras. She speaks all English at home, pero abuelita vive la, this is the abuela factor, okay? She's in the house speaking Spanish. They watch novelas every night, okay? And Carolina speaks to her grandmother in English. The grandmother responds in Spanish, and they have that kind of, she's also a heritage speaker, okay? The most common student I see, and my sense from talking with you, Elena, is that this is who you see most commonly as well, is a kid like Jose. Jose is born in the US or brought very young, right, by parents who come as adults. So adult immigrant parents. He speaks 100% Spanish with them because they don't know English, okay? He speaks more and more English with his siblings as time goes by. And what's really striking about Jose is that he often shows up to school monolingual in Spanish, or very close to it. By the time this kid's in 3rd grade, his English has taken over his Spanish. I mean, this is just remarkable, and it flies in the face of these people who are, immigrants aren't learning English. Where are they looking? Where are they looking? Because everywhere I see children acquiring English, losing their heritage languages, okay? So if you've got a program, if 80% of your students are like Jose, okay, what do you do with somebody like Carolina? She won't thrive in a program built for kids with the strong Spanish skills like Jose has. So what I'm saying is, heritage speakers' linguistic, affective, and educational needs are different. You've got to separate the apples from the oranges at the early levels of instruction, but you're going to have to deal with quite a bit of heterogeneity, okay? Now what about some pedagogical, I would almost call them philosophical approaches, right, that underlie the kind of pedagogy you're doing. And here again, I'm thinking of Spanish programs, university and high school Spanish language programs, okay? There are at least 2 options, the 2 most common ones. One is you separate them, okay? You have Spanish 1, 2, 3, 4 as a foreign language, and then you have Spanish however many you want to have. We'll talk about that, for your heritage speakers, and they are separated at the beginning levels. I've never heard of anybody advocating for keeping them separate all throughout the minor or major, but at those beginning language levels, having them be separate. A lot of other places will either mix them because they don't think they need to be separated, or they're just sort of de facto mixed because, the heritage program never makes, we never have enough students, we let them go where they want. If they want to take Spanish 3, they say, okay, go ahead, take Spanish 3, that's just fine. I'd like to argue here that if you have that separate heritage speaker course created, heritage speakers who have the requisite proficiency, not just because their last name is Hernandez, okay? If they have the requisite proficiency, they should not be permitted to take the L2 class, the basic language class. For the same reason that when I showed up to college, native English speaker, I had an English language requirement. My college would never have allowed me to satisfy that English language requirement in the ESL class, would they? They would think I was ridiculous. They wouldn't care if I said, oh, but it fits my schedule better. Oh, but I want to get an easy A. Oh, but I should be able to go where I want to go. They would say, no, no, and no. You're a native English speaker, you cannot take the ESL class. This is what we're doing when we're letting highly proficient Spanish speakers take SSL, take Spanish as a second language, okay? It's pedagogically unsound, although it is very common. Has anybody ever survived a class like this, either teaching it or taking it? Yeah, okay. I know I have, and so the L2 students, of course, your first thought might be, well, those L2 students are gonna be really intimidated, right? So you got John Smith sitting next to Jose, who I just showed you, going, oh my, this isn't fair, what's he doing here? He just wants an easy A. I'll never be able to speak like that, right? They can often get intimidated, but you know what my research found, I just studied on this in Urbana, the heritage speakers are intimidated by the second language learners. Why? Because the second language class is built around that path we talked about earlier, the path to acquisition, right? So John, in his Spanish class, learned the difference between the predicate and the imperfect. He learned how to take an infinitive, take off the ending, and put on the opposite vowel to form the subjunctive in conditions of wish, emotion, doubt. And Jose's like, right? That easy A doesn't materialize, and we already talked about his low linguistic self-esteem, so he's like, órale, el güero sacó una A, yo saqué una C, my Spanish is worse than I thought, right? And then, of course, the teacher goes crazy, because you're teaching 2 classes in one, right? Very, very difficult. I know my colleagues in education, we do this a lot with young children, we can do this when they're a lot younger. When you're dealing with basic language content for adults, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. How do you do it? How do you make the best, if you have a mixed class and there's nothing you can do or say to your administration to get them separated? Or let's say you have 2 heritage speakers in your whole program, okay? Well, First thing, I think you need to assess what it is that they know. I mean, that's how they're different from second language Spanish. I don't know if Holly or others would agree with me. Spanish 2, second semester Spanish here, pretty much looks the same as it does in Chicago, looks the same as it does in New York, looks the same as it does in China, and probably on Mars. Second semester Spanish covers, you might do something before something else, depending on how the book presents it, but it's a pretty homogeneous thing that's happening. Okay? With heritage speakers, you can make absolutely no assumptions. They signed up for Spanish 2, you don't know what that means. Okay? It's going to depend very locally on your local population. Also, you want to avoid what you might call the poster child syndrome. A lot of the students that I interviewed, some of them loved being like the only Hispanic kid in the class, and they always want to say stuff. Other young people say, you know what, I hated always being called on, like, and what does your family do for Dia de Muertos? And does your grandma kill chickens too? And like, they said, just leave me alone, I don't. So you have to be sensitive to these issues with your students, okay? Also, I'd like to point out, I've had some instructors say to me, oh, pero no me quites a mis heritage speakers. I love having them there because they help me. And I put them con los güeritos and they help them. They, help them with their Spanish. And I think that can be very empowering if it's done properly, but I also think that helping has to go 2 ways. Because these folks did not come to college to be unpaid tutors for folks wanting to learn Spanish, okay? Melissa Bowles in Urbana-Champaign actually is doing some really neat work figuring out how to structure that interaction, because they don't have, well, I won't get into why they don't have it. This is on video, isn't it? They don't have a heritage speaker program, and so they're working on ways to make that work. And so I think I applaud that kind of thing. Also, for any of you who are dealing with this mixed heritage L2 and you just kind of don't know what to do and you can't get them separated, differentiated instruction is the way to go. Again, our colleagues in education know what this is. They've read about this. We in foreign language education, maybe it's, no, right? Okay, it's not just me. We don't hear about this. We don't talk about this, okay? This is a fantastic resource. There are plenty more. I think if you summed up differentiated instruction, it really is just more work for you. More work for you as the instructor. Am I right? It's absolutely necessary. You can differentiate products, processes, assessments. There's many different ways to differentiate. It's a lot of work, okay? This is why I highly recommend separating the classes out. Now, some people will say, it costs more money. We don't have the money. My department head said no, because we don't have the money to create a separate heritage speaker class. And here's what happens. It doesn't necessarily cost more. Let's say you were budgeted for 12 sections of Spanish X, okay? Turns out you got 2 heritage speakers here, 1 here, 3 here, none here, 2 here, 1 here, right? Están regados por ahí? So what you can do, pull those all out, and you still have your 12 sections that you were budgeted, but one of them becomes a designated heritage speaker section, okay? And that didn't cost you anything, okay? Now, what some people might say is, well, then that's not fair, because instead of all these different time slots, the heritage speakers have to go to this one time when it's being offered. And I have a couple of ideas to sort of dorarles la píldora in that situation. But now how do you separate them? So your department head, your dean has said, okay, fine, go. I'll give you the heritage speaker section. How are you going to separate them? Los apellidos engañan. We were talking about that the other day. Not all your Hernandezes are going to have that linguistic proficiency. And you can also have, I had a student, he was a returned Mormon missionary. He was like 6'12", redheaded, but his linguistic profile was that of a heritage speaker. And he placed into our program and he did very, very well there. So you can't go by, you have to go by linguistic criteria. So I was talking with Elena the other day, and I'll be happy to talk more if anybody wants to know what it is we do at UIC to separate our heritage speakers from our second language learners using purely linguistic criteria. Okay, with a set of multiple choice questions that do not include what does your mom speak at home, right? Nothing is autobiographical in that way, okay? This also lessens the burden on what we used to do was we used to have students read some statements, and if you identified with these statements, guess what? You're a heritage speaker, and you should go take the heritage speaker placement exam. Well, some folks didn't identify with that definition for whatever reason, or their advisors would tell them, no, go ahead to the basic language program and get your Easy A, which of course doesn't happen, okay? So all of the instructors were prepared. How do you identify a heritage speaker? And then what do you do? How do you go up to a kid after class and say, hey, listen, I think you're a heritage speaker, I think you might, right? When you've got a placement procedure, this invisible hand sort of in place that's doing this in an objective way, then that lessens that burden on the instructors. Okay, and here's what I said I would come back to about how do you convince this young person that they should go to this one section at 1 o'clock instead of all the other times that are available? There's a couple of ways. First of all, You know how you have a foreign language requirement, and it's, X semester, and the basic language program takes 4 semesters to get there. If your heritage program can do it in 2 or even 1, that right there is an incentive, right? You're getting through your foreign language requirement much more quickly. Another incentive is to offer retroactive credits. We do that at UIC. If you get a B or higher in the heritage speaker class, then you get the retroactive credits. I think we give them 4 retroactive credits for all the prior coursework that they didn't do, right, in the basic language program. Finally, the basic language program, it's 4 credit, so 4 seat hours, okay? The heritage can be 3 seat hours and 1 hour online, right? That's just another, students like that. And if you craft that properly, that can just be another incentive to get them to say, okay, I'll sign up for that 1 time slot and I won't be mad about it, kind of thing, right? Now, when you think about going back to the instructors and what is it that they see their duty as, what is their job, okay? Some insist that their job is to teach standard Spanish. Well, their Spanish is terrible. Some of them actually think this. My job is to help them clean it up and speak this standard variety that I learned in Xlandia, okay? Of course, the concept of standard language has been rejected, rotundamente by linguists, okay? So you have Hidalgo in the Southwest. There's no standard language, only a social or regional variety that was elevated to higher status. Okay, that's what we looked at earlier, right, with the linguistic, the features. Okay? Escobar, standard language is an abstract concept representing a variety that no one actually speaks. Okay? I think we can all agree that Spanish has standard spelling, right? And some morphological agreement endings. Everything else varies. Spanish varies on a number of different levels, and anyone who studies dialectology can see that. So I think a better approach to deal with teachers is an analogy that I stole from Ana Celia Centella. And then once I confessed to her, hey, I stole your beach and wedding analogy, she's like, no te preocupes, mi hija, porque yo se lo robé a otra persona. So you go ahead and use it, it's okay. And it goes like this. When you go to a context like this, beach, right? What kind of clothing do you wear? It's not a nudist beach, Scott. You have to wear something. What kind of clothing do we wear? ¿Qué ropa nos ponemos para ir a la playa? Traje de baño, chancla, stuff like that. So if you were, I don't know, Justin Timberlake, right? You would go like this, right? So let's say Mr. Timberlake has a wedding that evening in this place that looks, like a temple or a church or some type of formal place. What would he wear there? Un traje, pero este es un traje.
Un traje formal.
Oh, un traje formal. So maybe he would go like this. ¿Sí? ¿Llevaría las chanclas de la playa? No. Si lo acompaña una dama, ¿qué se pone ella?
Un traje formal.
Traje formal. ¿Con chanclas? No. Con tacones, right? Okay. What would happen if he showed up to the wedding wearing this? Right? Apart from everybody going, right? So, ¿qué diría la gente? What would people say?
Qué mal educado.
Qué mal educado, este está loco, qué descarado. ¿Cómo se atreve? Right? He is dressed in a manner that is completely
Inappropriate.
I like that word, inappropriate. Notice he did not say incorrect. He said inappropriate. Okay? Del mismo modo, si va a la playa vestido así, and no, it's not a beach wedding, Scott. If he shows up like this over here, ¿qué va a decir la gente?
¿Qué calor tiene el pobre?
Qué calor, pero está loco, se está pasando. What's wrong with this guy? He's dressed in a manner that's completely
Inappropriate.
okay. Now, here's the crux of the argument. Can you say that a bathing suit is incorrect? ¿Puede una prenda de ropa ser inherentemente incorrecta?
No.
No. At most it can be.
Mucho de verdad.
¿Cómo?
Inappropriate.
Thank you. Right. At most it can be considered inappropriate. Okay? Can a tie be incorrect? I've seen a lot of ugly ties. Okay? But we cannot say that a tie is incorrect. So the point of this, I'm sure you're with me, okay? Our students often come to our classrooms with what you might call beach Spanish. Okay? And our job as educators is to help them prepare for these more formal contexts. Okay? Why would we expect them to have this type of Spanish? If you think about it, why does he only have bathing suits in Spanish? That's his Spanish closet. But look at his English closet. Okay? It's because every time he's had to go to a wedding, and you know what I mean by wedding, right? I'm talking about formal linguistic interactions, written texts, etc. Okay? He's always had to do that in English, so he's developed these things. He's picked them up along the way. Everything he's ever had to do in Spanish has been at the beach, so that's all he's got in his closet. So if we as educators, and I see this all the time, you know, Jose shows up in his bathing suit to class, right? And the teacher's reaction, Fuch, pero ¿cómo te atreves? Quítate eso, quémalo. I never want to see that again. They're like offended and insulted and don't you know any better? And, right? Adding, compounding to Jose's linguistic shame, right? Wouldn't a better approach be to say, pues órale, at least he's not naked, right? Vino con algo. He's got our L2 learners show up naked, yeah? So he's got some communicative abilities, okay? No one's ever told him that you can't say aiga or fuistes informal, or some of the other stigmatizers that we're talking about. So number one, to tell them that's incorrect is incorrect. We've just seen that no naturalistic language use in a community can be called incorrect, okay? So the first step is just to point out, listen, you know that you can't write cuz in an English essay, don't you? Well, eventually they learn this, right? You know. So aiga is kind of like cuz. It's not incorrect, it's just not, what's the word? For a particular context, okay? So questioning this concept of incorrect, I think if there's one thing teachers leave with, it's I would love for them to leave with that idea. Not considering their students' Spanish incorrect, talk about formal versus informal, and respect. Respect what they come to the classroom with. That's the number one word, okay? And you don't want them to eliminate their bathing suits, because they're going to need those every time they go to the beach. You don't want them going home and saying, abuela, usted habla muy mal, usted tiene que hablar. No. Right? You want to respect them so that they respect themselves and their own families, okay? So I don't know, I kind of like Macy's, maybe because I'm from New York, but an approach, instead of shaming them and asking them to, you know, take that off and put it away, take them to the store, take them to Macy's. All right, try this on. Okay? We're expanding their wardrobes, okay? So they're going to get it wrong, the shirt's going to be on backwards, and the shoes are going to be on the wrong foot, but little by little they're going to learn, does this make sense? How to dress, so to speak, how to use language, how to expand their repertoires for more formal Spanish occasions, okay? And when I talk about questioning the concept of incorrect, look at the kind of language that you're seeing around you in print. If these become uses of communities that you're seeing in print, you've really got to question what right you have to say eso es incorrecto. Porque no se dice así en Xlandia, right? So I mean, I grew up in New York and we call the trunk of a car a trunk. Okay? Nobody ever said to me, Kim, you better not call it a trunk anymore. You better start calling it a boot so that people in England understand you. No one ever said that. Why do we continually do this to our heritage speaker students? Why do we hold them to an external norm and tell them, pues nadie en España te va a entender? You know how many of my students go to Spain? Not too many. Now, if they do go to Spain, that's great. They'll broaden their horizons and they will quickly learn, aquí se viste de otra manera. And I better acquire these ways of speaking and doing things. But when the majority of your folks are staying in their hometowns and working with their own communities, why, oh why, do we put an external norm on them? See, I have a student tell me, no, that's not correct. And I go, oh God, here comes the purist. He goes, no, it should be taxas with an A. Not taxes, taxas. In his community, they say taxas instead of taxes. Okay? Now, this to me is one of the most challenging parts of our job as heritage language educators. Deciding what's okay at the wedding. We become these gatekeepers, right? We don't get tablets handed from up on high telling us esto sí está bien y esto no, right? And I think the clothing metaphor really does work. If you watch Mad Men, you see how women have to wear gloves. I mean, the way you wear clothes changes across time. So does language use. At what point do we accept aplicar para un trabajo en cualquier contexto? Okay? I struggle with this quite a lot. What I tend to fall back on is this idea that who is the audience? If you want to write for El Clarín, you got to write a certain way. If you want to write for La Raza, then go ahead and say aplicar. This is not a black and white, easy yes/no question. Okay? And I struggle with this. I'll give you an example. Heritage speakers typically use the gerund in subject position. So instead of saying fumar es malo para la salud, they'll say fumando es malo para la salud. Okay? And I have a lesson, and I go over this, and I go over this, and it just, maestro, it sounds good, it sounds fine, leave me alone. So at what point do I say, all right then, that is a valid, right, U.S. Spanish, I understand you perfectly well, I am going to leave you alone on that little piece, right? What is stigmatized enough, right? Because, you know, and I don't want to be mistaken, sometimes I think people think that I advocate for anything goes, show up wearing, speaking however you want, doing everything is good, orale, that's great, let's all go home, right? I don't see that as my role. I see my role as a language educator to empower you to understand, if you do this way, you will be stigmatized, you will be called inappropriate, okay? I'm going to take you to Macy's, I'm going to help you learn how to dress in this fashion, then it's up to you to decide what you want to do. You're empowering the student to make that decision, okay? Now, if you do have a separate program or coursework for your heritage students, what on earth are you going to teach them, right? What's your curriculum going to be, okay? Well, first you need to assess what they already know. I've had people say, oh, what do you do at UIC? Here, take it all, look at it, but it's not one size fits all. You've got to see what your local students know and what they're capable of doing. Once you figure out what they know, here's what they know, here's what they don't know. Out of all the things they don't know, you've got to figure out what's most important. What do you want them to learn? Okay? And again, I think this is pretty unproblematic in second language courses, but again, heritage speakers are very, very heterogeneous. And I'll tell you the answer that I've come up with. Assessing my students in Chicago, there's this stuff they know, a lot of stuff they don't know. For example, my students in Chicago cannot identify a pretérito from an imperfecto. They cannot identify subjuntivo, conjugated for you, and tell you when it's used. I've decided that's not important. If they're going to go major minor in Spanish, then yes, sorry, you got to sit through my boring Spanish 202 class and learn all that stuff. But if you're just fulfilling your foreign language requirement, and like 99% of the students, you're going to go off into the world, I get you for 1 semester, maybe 2. I'm not going to spend that semester teaching you the difference between the pretérito and the imperfecto. What I'm going to do is make my class look more like language arts. I'm going to focus on reading and writing and critical argument. And I think the best compliment I ever get is when they'll come back and they'll say, Maestra, I write better in my other classes now. Because your class is about writing. It's about argument writing, reading and writing and formulating opinions. I'm going to throw 3 more ideas at you and I'm going to stop and see if you have any comments that you want to share. A couple of curricular ideas. One, I love to teach them about language contact. Okay? Because they'll say, yo no hablo español, yo hablo Spanglish. And I'll say, really? Because Spanglish is composed of code switching, borrowings, extensions, and calcs, and we go through examples of these 4. I give them tests, I make them figure out what's what, para que la próxima vez que vayan a México y el primo se burla de ellos, ay, mira, ahí viene el pocho, they can answer and say, bueno, I just used a semantic extension followed by a interstitial code switch. And there are people who make a good living studying the way I talk, right? Why don't you try, right? So we go through all of this, and then that word Spanglish, I invite them and I invite you to think about that word, okay? There's actually a really, really good debate between 2 people who are the best of friends, who agree on the value of U.S. Spanish. They don't disparage it, but they disagree on the word Spanglish, okay? Professora Centella says we have to take control of that word, give it a semantic inversion the way people did in queer studies. They took this really bad word and made it something positive, okay? She says that's what we should do with Spanish. El profesor Ortega dice, decirle a un joven que habla Spanglish es decirle que no habla, lo que habla no es español. It's giving young people the wrong idea that what they're speaking isn't, it's somehow othered, right? And it's disparaging, etc., etc. So I'll leave that up to you to go check out the debate and decide. Just so we use this word in a conscious way, okay? Second idea, the teaching of grammar. I think I've been pretty clear about my opinions on, at least in the introductory levels, do they really need to study grammar? If you've decided that you want your heritage speakers to study grammar, okay? Be clear about what this means. Do you want them to learn terminology, right? Or do you want them to do certain uses? And if you're going to do uses, focus only on things that they have trouble with. So don't do, let's conjugate verbs in the presente simple. Don't do, I saw a 50-minute class in a Chicago high school heritage speaker class. They filled in the blanks with el, la, los, or las. And when I asked the teacher afterwards, why did you do a class where they filled in el, la, los, and las for 50 minutes? She said, well, it was in the book. So she was using an L2 book with heritage speakers. And I said, do your students have trouble with el, la, los, and las? She said, well, there's a couple of curveball, colibri, is it el or la? This is justified by right? Wouldn't your time be better spent with things that we know that they do sometimes have trouble with? Gustar type verbs, right? They're mixing the agreement. The use of the past subjunctive, this infinitive and subject position, which I've already confessed to you I've stopped doing. The use of a instead of e. Have you noticed this? That's something that maybe you can work on with them. Or the fact that they'll write without the H. These are things that you say, aha, okay. That's something that you've documented that they've got issues with and you're targeting that. Not definite articles, okay? And again, the communicative revolution unfortunately has not hit a lot of people. It's bad enough in L2 classes when you have these decontextualized drill and kill fill in the blank. It's even worse with heritage speakers, okay? Finally, no, this is 3. I said I had 4. So this is 3 out of 4. Focusing on writing in your classes. There's this really pernicious misperception out there that if heritage speakers can't fill in blanks with verbs, they're not ready to write. And they're not ready to read. I think it's just the opposite. You've got to get the reading and writing, and then you'll notice verb uses. Writing is a process. It's not on Friday, turn in a 3-page composition and use the subjunctive 6 times. Okay? Having multiple versions. This is, I know it's been around for a while, but I came upon it fairly recently, about 7 years ago. Making sure there's an audience and a purpose. So often we're told, write a composition about your family, turn it in. Who's the audience? The teacher. What's the purpose? To get a grade, right? When you play around with the audience and purpose, you're contributing to a history project. They want to learn about your faith, etc. Even if it's fake. You know, sometimes I'll say, you're going to send this letter to President Obama. I don't even think he reads Spanish. But they've got, then they know who, you know how the audience changes your text so much. Also, be selective and respectful when you're providing that feedback. That goes back to what we were saying before. And always give them a detailed rubric. When I started getting into this writing as a process, I did an experiment. I used to have my heritage speakers do 3 compositions, 2 versions each. And I thought, what if I switch to 2 compositions and they do 3 versions each? And a colleague, a senior colleague of mine said, well, it's a college class. You can't do 2 compositions in a college class. That's not rigorous enough. I was like, well, you know, 3 times 2 is the same as 2 times 3. They're doing 6 versions. And guess which ones ended up in much superior. You guess, you're all nodding your head, right? It was this one. These ended up in far, far superior products, okay? Final idea, using U.S. Latino communities as a focus of study, okay? It's wonderful to look to Spain and study things about Spain. It's wonderful to look to Latin America and study things about Latin America. But did you know that the United States is the second largest Spanish-speaking country on the planet, okay? And what I find is that my students in Chicago know nothing about the migrant farm workers movement, Cesar Chavez, Chicano, Aslan, all that stuff. They don't know anything about the New York Poets Cafe. They probably don't know anything about Lorain, Ohio, and the number of Puerto Ricans that are over here, right? So wouldn't it be wonderful if part of your curriculum was to do a self-study of your community and then share it with other communities? And Andrew Ross out of Arizona State has a fantastic program called Hispanidades, where this is what students do. They create digital storyboards and share it with students across the U.S. So it's a really wonderful model. Final word about teacher preparation. I get this a lot, particularly in high schools, where these high school teachers, their level of Spanish is not that red hot, and the heritage speakers speak Spanish better than they do. Yeah? Okay. So this creates, what do I want to say? A situation, yeah, in which the teachers often feel intimidated. They don't want to deal with this kind of thing. This article is fantastic. It's called "A Gringa's Going to Teach Me Spanish." Okay. The author is Ann Edstrom. She does a really, really good job problematizing her position as a white woman who learned Spanish as a second language and is now teaching it to heritage speakers. I won't do it justice to try to summarize it here. I encourage you to go out and look at it. I will say that if you're going to work with heritage speakers, the key word is respect. And that's what she found too. If I respect them, I teach them to respect me. Because I've also heard of these heritage speaker kids bullying their widow teacher who doesn't, you know, saying stuff they don't understand, right? That can happen too. So that's got to be nipped in the bud as well. And I think that can be addressed in a profitable way. Finally, teachers are desperate for professional development. They're not getting this in their teacher training program. So I'm going to suggest this resource. It's free. It's online. I know you can't scribble down that URL right now, but if you just go to the National Heritage Language Resource Center, okay, it's StarTalk. You can remember StarTalk. So just go to StarTalk, and they've got these online modules. There's 8 of them. Again, they're free. You have to sign up for an account, but they're free. And it takes you through a lot of these different issues of heritage language learning. I would require this. If I ran a teacher training program like yours, Holly, I mean, I would just require them to do this as part of it. And then moderately shameless self-promotion. I do have a book with 2 co-authors, okay, that summarizes the way we see the field and the types of things that kind of unpacking everything I just talked about with you just now. So in summary, you know, this is just good pedagogy in any field, right? Meet the students where they are, choose materials relevant for them. I argue for a language arts approach when they've got that strong Spanish proficiency, and respecting them, respecting their histories and their language that they bring. So I think thoughts or questions. Thank you.